we may be underestimating just how motivated the Browns are to take a quarterback early in this draft. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Nobody can be mad if the Browns go offensive lineman at 6. In a trade back scenario, would you rather get 2 premier picks this year or a future first? Plus, the Browns may actually be considering drafting a quarterback earlier than we think. And that is where we start the show here today because, listen, at this point, we are coming up on, as of 4 o'clock here on Wednesday, a full week of free agency. And the Browns have made some notable moves, mostly along the offensive line. They've also added a few other positions here or there, and they've put themselves in a spot where they've addressed some specific needs, some areas of need, but they also leave some things kind of open-ended right now. And most of all, that's happened at the quarterback position, where they've added nobody and they've kept things very much status quo. And there's on one hand, keeping things where they're at does point to the idea that A, this is going to be a true competition like they talked about, and that they're comfortable doing that, and that B, and they're not going to force the issue on trying to go take some big swing like they didn't get Malik Willis, for example, whatever. And B, that they aren't rushing out there just to add other ancillary quarterbacks that have questions and may not be the full-fledged answer because they already have questions to answer with their current with the current state of quarterbacks. It feels like that's kind of where things are at, and so that does set the stage for, yes, Shedeur Sanders in a good spot in the driver's seat even to potentially win the job. Deshaun Watson going to have a chance to redeem his career and see what he can do. Maybe even Dillon Gabriel. Granted, I've been arguing that I think Dillon Gabriel probably gets moved at some point because I think he's the odd man out of this group, and I don't know that he fits Todd Monken's offense. That was very much a Kevin Stefanski pick, and it feels like it's inevitable that at some point he's just not going to be here. And so that, I think, actually frames or sets the stage nicely for where I want to start this conversation today, because I at one point my thought process on this was drafting a quarterback makes no sense for the Browns when they have a quarterback room right now that's filled with quarterbacks that all have questions in their own right. Shedeur, we're trying to figure out if he's truly the franchise quarterback and he can play more consistently with better teammates around him. Deshaun, it's, can he ever get back to being a top 5 quarterback? I say no, but we'll see. Dillon Gabriel, young player, does better circumstances around him help his cause? Is he just a game manager? Is he more of a backup in this league? All these guys come with questions. We don't have a full-fledged answer yet on who the franchise quarterback is. And so understanding that, why would you add another young quarterback into the mix, draft a guy that's going to be a project, that's going to take time, that's going to have his own rawness and his own questions and his own things that he has to figure out? I think that's a very fair thought process when this all kind of started. But in understanding that Dillon Gabriel may not be here, I actually think there's room to maybe add another young quarterback here at some point if they do, in fact, move on from Dillon Gabriel. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if that's going to be before training camp. I don't know if that's going to be during training camp. But if they were to move on from him at some point, you could theoretically have room to have another young quarterback on this roster that Todd Monken likes or whatever. But the other part of this, too, is just that there's until something happens, because I've said it before, I'll say it again. They're going to add somebody to that room. They generally carry 4 quarterbacks in the offseason anyway. And I still think Todd Monken wants to add somebody who, he picks, a quarterback that he gets sort of some say in here. Right now it's a room made up of 3 guys that he was not here to select in any way, shape, or form. So he's going to add somebody. The veteran market is what it is. Yes, you could add a Jameis Winston. That would just kind of be another veteran backup, good presence in the quarterback room and in the locker room. I would understand that. The one guy I've mentioned over and over again, Tyler Huntley, he's actually re-signed back with the Ravens. So it's not like there's not a ton of great options left. Marcus Mariota has some history with Todd Monken, so like maybe that's somebody that you could sign. So there's certainly some veteran options out there that are like, okay, sure, whatever, if you want to just add a body. But I think at this point, like if you're adding somebody, you're adding somebody for a purpose, and the draft options are more of a purpose. It would be, we're bringing this guy in because we think we can develop him potentially into a quarterback. And so I do wonder if we are starting to, or maybe not even starting to, but I wonder if we're underestimating just how likely it is that the Browns are looking at taking a quarterback in this draft. And there's been some smoke around this. There's been some talk around this. There's been some things said about the idea that maybe they really like Ty Simpson and they can pull the trigger on him earlier on than people would expect. I've talked about Ty Simpson at length. I don't necessarily think he's worth a first round pick because the 15 starts worry me. Second round, maybe, but I think because it's going to take a while for him, I think to kind of come along, you take a guy in the second round, you're still planning on them being somebody who starts sooner rather than later. I don't know if that's what you want from your quarterback at this point if you're going to take a guy. Maybe it is, though. Maybe they fall in love with him, and that's their answer. If they decide that Ty Simpson's worth drafted in the first round because they think he can be a franchise quarterback, then I guess you got to pull the trigger in the first round because, again, I say it every year. If they talk themselves into or are convinced that somebody's the guy, that somebody's there for them on the board that they think can be their franchise quarterback, then you absolutely pull the trigger where it's appropriate. And that's usually in the first round because the first round quarterbacks generally have the most leash to play. But more than likely, and I don't know what you want to say in terms of like early. Like if it was the second round, I'd understand it a little bit more. I think there's bigger fish to fry in the first round than just addressing the quarterback position. I think you can manage with the guys that you have right now who, again, have their own questions, and a rookie's going to have his own questions if it isn't Fernando Mendoza, who's going to also have questions when he gets drafted by the Raiders. So I don't know that there's like a clear-cut, solution in the draft in terms of like finding that franchise guy long-term or anything. But if they're going to, the longer that they do nothing at the quarterback position, and it did take a few weeks, by the way, before the Browns actually signed Joe Flacco last year, who still is a free agent out there, so maybe that's even on the table. But the longer that this kind of lingers where they haven't added anybody to the room and they've just kind of kept it all status quo, the more and more it's going to feel like they might have their eyes on a quarterback earlier than we're expecting in the draft. And I would not be so. And so what I'm trying to get at here is I wouldn't be surprised if at this point, I think I would have been more surprised earlier this offseason if you had told me, well, they're going to draft a guy. At this point, I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if they do draft a guy because they've kind of ignored the guys that are out there in the market right now, and they seem to be waiting on a few things when the draft's going to roll around, and maybe there's somebody that they really like that they think, hey, we can draft this guy, we can develop this guy, even if it's a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick. And I actually think that's probably a fine range to get a guy. I think if you're using your top 3 picks on one in this year's class specifically, it'll feel like a wasted pick in the end because I don't know that any of those guys that you would take I don't know that any of these guys are going to be like bona fide starters. And I feel like that's just a little too early. I don't like taking any of these guys in the first or the second, but they might fall in love with one and feel like they have to pull the trigger because, again, if you don't have an answer at quarterback or you don't have that solved, you're always in the market for one. And Andrew Berry even said at the Combine he's okay taking one every year. Piecing the puzzle together, reading the tea leaves. I wouldn't put it past them to actually take a quarterback early on in this draft, and I don't think that should be overlooked. That maybe that's what they're holding out for, is to take one earlier than people would maybe expect or anticipate, which would probably throw a lot of us for a loop, but shouldn't come necessarily as a surprise because, again, right now, they do not know who their long-term solution at quarterback is. With that said, trading back in the draft, very much on the table. I've talked about this a ton this offseason. I have kind of a would you rather scenario, though, when it comes to trading back and the capital that you would get in return. I'll share that with you and throw it your way next on the Locked On Browns podcast. College basketball is nonstop, big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night from early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts. There's always action on the board, and now FanDuel's giving you a way to turn that energy into an even bigger potential win with the college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want, ranked matchups, rivalry games, whatever fits your read, different seeds that you maybe like in the tournament. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Look at the odds around the team that you maybe cheer for throughout the season, and then you apply the profit boost and instantly bump up your potential payout when it's all said and done. You know what month it is. You know what's coming up this weekend. It's your chance to use this profit boost to your advantage. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style now with more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. All right, so I have kind of like a would you rather scenario for the type of capital the Browns could get back in a potential trade back from 6, and I want to see which you'd prefer, and I'll give you which one I prefer. But first, just real quick, a reminder to join the Everyday Club now and use code MARCH to get your first month free. If you sign up before the NCAA tournament tips off on Thursday, tomorrow, you can compete against me and others hosts in our men's and women's bracket pools as well via the Discord channel that you get access to. The winner can get $100 in Locked On merch, and the rest of us can commiserate as our brackets get busted in that Discord channel. Again, sign up for the Everyday Club. Just head to LockedOnBrowns.supercast.com to do that. Use code MARCH. You get your first month free. It's $5 after that to get the show ad-free every single month on whatever audio platform you choose. All right, so the Browns theoretically could be looking to trade back. I think it's very much on the table for them with that number 6 overall pick. They're going to be in a weird spot, and I do think that it's going to be on the table for them because if you're thinking best player available strategy, which is the way a lot of teams operate and probably should operate because that's how you build good teams is just by drafting good players, I think there could be players available. We've talked about them. Caleb Downs, Arvo Reese, if he slips, David Bailey, whatever, that maybe the Browns don't feel like they need right now, but another team feels like we got to get. And so that opens the door for a team to maybe trade up and you to trade back, and you get these partners, these teams that are willing to do so, and then you can shift around the board a little bit, trade back, and still get value at a position that you feel like you need maybe more, whether it's offensive line, whether it's wide receiver, whatever. I think this is very much how the Browns could be playing this thing when the draft rolls around in April. We'll see. And maybe they're already working back channels to get deals done. We'll find out. But ultimately, when you're drafting 6, that's probably not something that's happening beforehand unless there's a quarterback involved, and we know that that's not the case this year. So with that said, if the Browns were to trade back, I want to know if you would rather get draft capital up front. And by that, I mean, there's some teams that could trade up that have 2 firsts this year. We know there's a list of teams that all have 2 firsts this year. So the Jets are one. Granted, they already would have picked at this point, so they wouldn't have one. The Dolphins now, after the Jalen Waddle trade, are one. The Cowboys are one who have 2 this year. The Rams did have 2. They don't anymore. So would you rather get the draft capital up front and basically to move, if say it's the Cowboys, if the Cowboys are going to move up from 11 to 6, you could get 2 firsts this year from them and go to 11 and get their other first round pick. And then you get 3 first rounders this year because you also have pick 24. Even if it's Miami has 11 and 30. I messed that up. The Cowboys have 12, and I forget what their other pick is. The Dolphins have 11 and 30. And you could get 2 first rounders this year from them, the one that's their original pick and the one that they added via trade, and then you'd have 3 total for 2026. Or would you rather, if you trade back, get their pick this year that you're swapping, and then a future first, as in 2027 most likely, and sort of position yourself to have some flexibility next year? I've been pretty clear about my answer on this throughout, not specific to this topic, but I've brought up numerous times that getting a 2027 first round pick is of the utmost value and importance to me personally, because a lot of this centers around the quarterback conversation, obviously, but if you don't have a franchise quarterback yet, you should always be thinking about how you can put yourself in position to get one and find one. And adding that flexibility of having a first next year is a smart philosophy that could set you up to potentially land that guy, because you can move up and down the board when you have more draft capital at your disposal to trade or flip or send to somebody. It just makes it more attractive to do just that. That's what the Browns did this past year. They traded back, got a first rounder this year, and they have more flexibility this year to maybe move around the board and do some different things. And they at least put themselves in position to, if the quarterback class was better, maybe move up if they felt like they needed to. And unfortunately, the quarterback class this year isn't very good, so maybe they don't feel like they need to do it this year. But you can try that again and kind of kick the can down the road, if you will, on the quarterback conversation, which is why, again, it gives you this kind of year in between to figure out what you have in Shedeur Sanders, what you have in Deshaun Watson, maybe what you have in Dylan Gabriel. And that's the beauty of it this year, is you kind of get to put those guys to the test, but you also still could theoretically set yourself up to get an answer to your questions for those guys, and then know next year, okay, they have a first round, they have 2 firsts, they can move up and down the board, they can get a guy that they covet or whatever if the class next year ends up being better, which again is all hypothetical, because last year we were saying the same thing about this class, and this class hasn't turned out to be very good. It's just about the flexibility, and here's the thing, because I know what people are going to say is, well, you don't need the flexibility if Shedeur Sanders proves to be good. I get that, but here's the thing: it's not a negative if you have an extra first next year because you trade back this year and still land a player that helps you this year and for the future. But then Shedeur plays well, and you can just lean into him. And guess what? Now you have 2 first rounders next year that you can also use to bolster the roster around him. Like, why is that a bad outcome? If you come to find that he is your franchise quarterback, I don't think that's a bad outcome at all. It's a win-win if you have a pick next year, because it either sets you up to add to the roster even more with multiple picks in the first round, or it puts you in position where you can, again, maybe draft that franchise quarterback finally. So if it's up to me, and I'm doing the would you rather on getting an additional first this year and then having 3, because you'd be trading a pick, sliding to a different first round pick, and then adding a pick with some of these teams that have 2. The Dolphins now have 2, like I said. The Cowboys now have 2, like I said. And those are the 2 teams I've kind of been primarily focused on, because I do feel like they're in that range that the Browns could slide back to, just outside the top 10, that might be willing to trade up and give up a future first or whatever to do so, or multiple firsts to do so. We'll see. But understanding that, would you rather have the picks up front this year and have 3 in the first round this year? Or would you rather get a future first in 2027? And when I'm answering that question, for me, it's the future first in 2027, just because of the value of that for what it sets you up for next year, potentially at the quarterback position or otherwise. And it just gives you, again, the added flexibility, which is never a bad thing to have in any draft. And it's not to say, I wouldn't mind them drafting 3 players in the first round this year that you feel like then you have locked up for years to come. You have the 5th-year option on them. The Browns actually did that back in, the year Myles Garrett came out in 2017, taking Myles, David Njoku, and Jabril Peppers. So it's a good philosophy and a good way to build. But I just think the value of a future first is important. The biggest thing is, though, our team's going to be willing to give that up. It might come down to, and this is why I think this question is so interesting, taking a second first from one of those teams this year, because they might not be willing to give up a 2027 first, because it seems like right now the market is kind of saying and dictating that teams are coveting those 2027 first rounders because of what could be coming down the pike here at the quarterback position, which I find a very interesting part of this conversation as well that we'll have to get into more. But I think it's important to keep that in mind. But if it's up to me and I'm choosing one or the other, I'd rather get a 2027 first in a deal that I'm in a deal to trade back than an additional first this year that would then give you 3 to make 3 picks in 2026. That's just my feeling on it. But I'm sure people feel differently, and if you do, you're more than welcome to let me know why I'm wrong. With all that said, I understand where people are wondering if receiver is now the play at 6 for the Browns, but I'll say this. Nobody should really be mad if the Browns take an offensive lineman with the 6th overall pick. I don't really think there's an outcome where it's a reach either. I'll explain what I mean coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and that one position you still have to fill is open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs helps you reach the people that would actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, and location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I'm going to talk to you about Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. As somebody who's used Indeed to apply for jobs, it's always nice seeing the sponsored jobs at the top of the page that you feel like really are a fit for you. And it's even better on the hiring end because you know that they're going to be catered to candidates that fit what you're looking for. Listeners of the show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job that premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? That's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. One more time, head on over to LockedOnBrowns.supercast.com and sign up for the Everydayer Club. You get the show ad-free. And right now, you can use code MARCH, M-A-R-C-H, to get your first month of the Everydayer Club totally free on us. Plus, if you sign up before the NCAA tournament kicks off, you can compete against me and our other hosts in the men's and women bracket pools via our Discord channel. That's a members-only thing. You get access to it when you sign up for the Everydayer Club. First month free with promo code MARCH. It's $5 a month after that. Again, LockedOnBrowns.supercast.com to sign up and learn more. So I heard a clip yesterday from, I believe it was Up and Adams and Joel Klatt, great college football analyst. I love Joel, was on the show. And he kind of made a comment about how the Browns are kind of stuck at 6 and they could be taking, say Monroe Freeling, who's a true like left tackle, and that he feels like that would kind of be a reach. So hearing that and also sort of crossing into this world where a lot of people are talking about the Browns going wide receiver at 6 now because they've already addressed a number of spots on the offensive line, which I understand that thinking. I understand where that comes from. I do think it's important to just say on the front end of this thing that if the Browns go offensive lineman at 6, unless you really hate the guy they take, and like for me, if they took Francis Maui-Noah and they tried to do like the right tackle move to left tackle thing again, and he might have to actually play guard at some point, that's probably the one guy that I wouldn't like at 6. Even though I know he could be slotted there for a lot of people because he is a talented player, but I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on that one. That's probably the one that I'm out on. But if it's any of these other offensive linemen near the top of this board, including Monroe Freeling, by the way, who's been rising up the board, I really don't think it's the wrong answer. Like I don't think anybody can or should be mad about the Browns going offensive line at 6. Again, unless you really hate the player that they take and you scouted him yourself and said, I don't like his game. Because we've heard Tom Monken talk about it. You build teams from the inside out. You build teams on the offensive line. An offensive rebuild like the Browns are undertaking right now starts in the trenches. It starts up front. It's why free agency kicked off with all the fanfare going on around different positions elsewhere. The Browns focused on the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts. They signed 3 different players, I guess traded for one, but they added 3 different players who can start on this offensive line for them immediately when they open things up next season. We don't know official roles yet, except for Titus Howard's been told he's playing tackle, but they feel like they addressed those things, and there's a reason they did that, because the offensive line is that important to the success of any football team. And so understanding that, and also understanding that the best offensive linemen generally don't even make it to the open market, and that the best offensive lines in football have multiple guys that were pretty much homegrown players that you drafted and developed, and that's how you build the best O-lines. it's important for the Browns to do that. It's important for the Browns to pivot to this world where they get young up front in the trenches and they're adding players and drafting players that become cornerstones for years to come. And the only way you do that is through the draft. The best tackles in this league generally don't leave their teams because they're that good and they were drafted by the team that they're with, and that team's not just gonna give them up for nothing or let them walk for nothing. So I just think it's important to remember how important the offensive line group is, how valuable that is to the success of a football team, and let that kind of frame everything for you. So yes, as much as I understand people love Carnell Tate or they love some of these other receivers, and I don't think it's wrong if the Browns go wide receiver at 6. I just think like if the outcome of the number 6 overall pick is you take a tackle, you take an offensive lineman, I don't know how anybody could really be mad about that because it is the most important positions. Those are the most important positions in football. You got to draft and develop those guys, and getting that taken care of is and finishing it off, frankly, because it now does feel like you'll have, depending on what Joel Bitonio decides, every spot sort of accounted for if you draft somebody that can play left tackle. That's a great way to kick things off with this rebuild, with the draft, and get the offense humming and back on track. I'm not going to blame them at all if they go offensive line at 6, or even if they trade back and take an offensive lineman early. I think Monroe Freeling is very much in play, and so to Joel Klatt's point, like I don't think that's even a reach, and it might seem like a reach for 6 to take certain players. I get that. But if it's an offensive lineman, I have a hard time calling it that. And I actually don't think taking Monroe Freeling at 6 is really a reach at this point because his stock has risen so far that I think he could be in play for some teams there, including the Browns, or at the very least, like still in the top 10. He's done a lot of good for himself with the way that this process has played out, with his combine workout, with all those things. And so I don't think it's that far-fetched that they take Monroe Freeling. And the idea that it's a reach, I think, is asinine. And again, you can't go wrong drafting O lineman anyway. Yes, I get there's different grades on guys. You don't want to go too far. Like, no, I'm not taking Sam Hecht, for example, at 6 or even probably at 24. That's more of a mid-round guy. Maybe late second round. Fine. But yes, there's value on certain guys that you would want in the first round. I get that. But I don't think that's the case for Monroe Freeling. I don't think that would be a reach. I don't think most of these linemen that are on the board at the top of the draft would be a reach there. And there's as much as there's the philosophy of best player available versus drafting for need and how you sort of balance that the best teams usually just take the best player available because that's how you build good teams. I agree with all that. There's also some truth in the idea that like different positions have different values. Quarterback's chief among those. Offensive line, especially offensive tackle, another premium position that gets a higher value placed on it. If you're addressing those things, if you're going after those positions and you feel like you're getting it right and your evaluation process is sound, I'm not going to fault you for taking an offensive lineman at any of those positions or with any of those picks, but especially at 6. So if that means you don't get a receiver at 6, so be it. The class is deep enough that you can still grab another really good one, I think, at 24, and I feel really good about the guys that you could get around 24. I'm okay with that. But if they do the opposite and you wait on a tackle, there should be some tackles available at 24 as well that I think are worth it, as I did in my mock draft this week. But I'm never going to fault the team for taking offensive linemen early, specifically offensive tackle, because you don't really take guards in the top 10. But if that's the outcome here and they take a Freeling or they take a Spencer Fano or whatever, I'm going to understand it. And I don't think it's anything to be upset about. I don't think it's reaching. I think it's just evaluating that there's a premium placed on that position and there's some players there that are going to be worth it. And I think both those guys for sure would be worth it. We'll see if that's what comes to fruition. But I think it's important to remember how valuable the offensive line is to the success of a football team, how crucial getting those guys right is to the success of a football team. And so I would not be upset with a pick that ends if the 6th pick becomes an offensive lineman, no matter how others might feel about it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you liked what you heard. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also check out my friends at Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the #1 sports podcast network. Catch you next time, Cleveland.